Welcome back to the CEOs Off the Record podcast. I'm your host, Jess, and today I have the honor of interviewing Aly Sanders, founder of the Breadwinner Club. If you've been trying to think about how you can monetize your expertise and escape corporate America, finally, you are not going to want to miss this episode. Aly is a former corporate and startup marketer who spent over a decade delivering results while being told to stay patient and work harder and wait her turn. We've all heard that. After years of 60 plus hour weeks, chronic burnout, and managing undiagnosed illness and neurodivergence, her body forced a reckoning. Aly stepped away from corporate, repackaged her marketing expertise into a fractional CMO offer, and within 60 days signed $137,000 in contracts while working fewer hours and keeping control of her time and her income. Since then, she's helped more than 200 professionals turn their existing skills into a high value fractional business. Her work centers around accessibility, sustainability, and helping people who have been told they're not quite ready claim what they already know how to do. This conversation is about ownership and outcomes and learning how to stop waiting for permission to be valuable. So grab your coffee, grab your tea, grab your afternoon glass of Merlot, get a notebook and pen, and settle in for a great episode. Let's go. Aly, welcome to the CEOs Off the Record podcast. I am so excited to talk with you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it and get started.
All right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started?
Sure. So I'm Aly Sanders. I have been a marketer and an entrepreneur for about 13 years now, which is wild to think it's been this long, but 13 years. I became a fractional CMO 3 years ago after spending about a decade building businesses, advising about like 100 entrepreneurs and startups through different startup organizations and nonprofits, teaching startup classes, all sorts of stuff like that. And I got to the point at that time where I was so stressed that I got really sick. And so I had to take a break and I took a sabbatical and fell in love with fractional work. I just kind of stumbled upon it on accident and just fell in love with it. And 3 years later, I'm now one of the top five fractional CMOs in Seattle, which is so cool to say. And I also am the founder and a coach at a business called Breadwinner Club. And at Breadwinner, we teach other professionals how to build fractional businesses because fractional work absolutely changed my life. And I just think more and more people should do it and leave their corporate jobs and have their own businesses. So I'm out here just trying to make business ownership as accessible as possible to whoever wants to explore it.
And I love that. I love that so much. I hadn't heard of fractional employees until I want to say maybe 4 years ago. I was at a job that I hated. I can say that now
We've
because I
all
don't work
had
there
them.
anymore. Right? Seriously.
Yep.
And I said, "Oh, this, would be a great opportunity for me." And I knew
Yeah.
the guy that was, he was a fractional CIO.
Okay.
So he had been the CIO for for another company I used to work for, and moved into being just, a fractional CIO. And I started asking him questions, but he never responded to me. And I'm like, so I don't really
Oh, geez.
understand. Right? I'm like, dude, can you help a sister out? I don't really understand how do you get into it and how do you so why don't you tell us what exactly is a fractional employee or fractional business?
Yeah. Oh, I could talk about this all day. So fractional work's really interesting, right? Because, a lot of people will say it's just a fancy consultant, and that's not true. A lot of people will call themselves fractionals when they're really just doing like freelance work, and that's not quite it either.
Okay.
Fractional work has been around forever, now there's just a name to it, which is great. So fractionals are essentially like leaders who give a fraction of their time to a business. So they are typically senior leaders and they're typically embedded into someone's business for a portion of time. Sometimes that's like a month and sometimes that's like a year. So like my biggest client I'll have been with that for like 2 years by the time our contract ends. So as a fractional, what's different than being like a freelancer or a consultant? As a freelancer, you're responsible for execution, right? So a business will come to you and say, hey, I need social media posts, or I need someone to set up my CRM, something like that. And they're telling you what their problem is and what their solution is that they need, and you're going to go fulfill that need. As a consultant, a traditional consultant, you're typically giving advice, but you're not responsible for the outcome of that advice. A fractional traditionally is responsible for transformation, for results. So because you're embedded into their teams, so with my clients, I sit on their leadership teams, I work with their boards, and I am responsible for sometimes leading one of their teams. I'm responsible for the success of some of their team members, but more than anything, I am responsible for transformation. So a fractional is going to go into a business and solve a very clear business problem, even if they have to be the one to identify what that problem is. And they help a company make more money. So even if you're in HR or operations or marketing like I am, it doesn't really matter what like vertical you're in. Either way, you're impacting like the trajectory of a business.
Okay, so like strategy, you come up with the
Yeah.
strategy, but you don't actually do the work. You would have a team that would be the people working there that would do the work.
Yeah, it depends.
Mhm,
Um, this is what's interesting about fractional work and where it is now compared to a few years ago. So,
mhm,
a few years ago, most fractionals were coming from pretty large corporations and they were working with large corporations. However, fractional work, in my opinion, is needed most by businesses who can't afford that kind of senior expertise and leadership, right? They're the ones who need it the most. So, that's where I think fractional work is going, is into small and medium businesses, and that's who I really love to work with, especially on the startup side. So with those kind of businesses, oftentimes you are going to have to execute. So I execute with all of my clients. However, that execution looks like building out processes, building out frameworks, building out go to market playbooks. So it's like building out their foundations and
mhm,
setting them up so when you're not with them anymore, they don't need you. So I have team members with my clients who are doing the nitty gritty. They're writing the blog posts. They're executing my strategy that I executed, right? That I built. And every now and then I jump in because I'm a team player. But if you are just giving advice, that's really going to end up more on the consultant territory, if that makes sense.
gotcha. So there is a
Yeah.
deliverable that you would provide to them and
Yes.
essentially be that employee. Now, how long do your contracts normally last?
So it depends. With my business and with the people that I coach, I always recommend having a couple different types of services. So I like to have what I call like a high ticket program. And that is solving a very clear, specific problem, sometimes like a micro problem that you can solve within 1 to 3 months.
Mhm,
And that's often a really great way to get your foot in the door because retainers are just by nature harder to get.
mhm.
Great way to get started, great way to start making really good money. You can make great money with it and work less than you did before, which is awesome because you're charging on value and not time. But while that's like a finite solution, right? Like you're promising a certain amount of time that you're working with somebody, you
Mhm,
can also do retainers. With retainers, I never do less than 6 months because as a fractional, I'm responsible for results and transformation. And that happens long term, like if I'm actually going to change the trajectory of a business, I'm going to need to be there for a while. So my current my biggest client started as 12 months and is now extending into 2 years because I
Mm.
love working with them, and may go longer than that, but I had a client who started in like February or March, and we ended up wrapping up in November, because the way they were going, they just didn't really need me anymore, and I'm not going
Mhm.
to take your money if you don't need me. So it really depends. There aren't like hard and fast rules, which is one of the great things about it.
Okay. And now, and that's why I asked that question, because I'm thinking based on, what you're doing for them, you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to get all of the work
Yes.
done and, the outcome accomplished.
Yes, and that's really where like your business model, your delivery model really comes
Mhm.
in. And that's, I mean, very similar in consulting too. In consulting, you're typically on like billable hours, and I am sometimes, but more often than not, what I like to do is structure it based on deliverables because I don't want to be paid for my time. I want to be paid for my expertise. And so if I can get something done in 4 hours, that would take someone with less experience, maybe 12 or 24 hours to get the same results. I want to be paid accordingly. So it really, all of it really depends. And some of it is also based on like your risk aversion. Some people in the beginning like to do hourly because it's a little more protected of your time and it's easier to manage like scope creep. And that is like one of the most common problems. In my first year, I was in scope creep all of the time. I worked so much and made basically no money. I think hourly I made like less than I did when I was in corporate. So, you know, it is all about like your delivery model and being protective of your time and figuring out what works for you for where you're at in your like fractional journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say when I first started in my career, I was doing websites. I was a website designer, a ungodly amount of years ago. And
Yeah.
that was huge, and we didn't have a name for it. It wasn't scope creep. We didn't have a name for it. It was just, the company that paid you got more out of you than they paid for.
Yep.
Then it became a thing, and it's like, oh, you're not supposed to be. Oh, okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's important, is that you protect your time. Now you've got
Yeah.
contracts with your clients to be able to protect your
Yes.
time.
Oh, yeah. I never do any sort of engagement without a contract. And especially as a fractional, you really never should.
Mhm.
Part of that, the reason is also managing expectations. Aside from just scope creep and managing your time and what can be expected of you, it also helps establish what your relationship is going to be with a client. So you want to go into your client and you're an advisor and a leader, and you're there to make decisions. You're not there to do what the client is telling you to do. And so a contract not only can protect your time, but can protect your expertise in what you're there to do. As a fractional or as a business owner of any kind, but especially as a fractional, like you will live and die by your results. And so, regardless of what vertical you're in, if you can't get the results you're promising because your contract is structured the wrong way or your
Mhm.
expectations were not set appropriately in the beginning of the engagement, it's really going to hurt your business. So, there's a lot of like, little nuanced things like that, that really you learn with time and experience. But
Mhm.
there are also some of the things that can like make or break a fractional in their first year.
Wow, wow. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this, because I know people are thinking it. Without telling us, details on your income, you mentioned that this could be lucrative. How exactly, how is everything set up? Like, how do you get paid? Is it one big lump sum, or and how lucrative could it be for people?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And that is like the number one question, right? Like if you're going to start a business, you want to make some money. And it's one of my favorite things about fractional work is that if you have the right business model, you can very much make like up to like $400 or more per hour. It just depends. Yeah, and it's not hard. Um, a lot of people go into this with that scarcity mindset that they're going to charge $50 an hour or something like that. And it's okay to start wherever you're comfortable. It really is. There's no right or wrong way to do it. However, it's great to price on the value of what you're bringing. If you are charging hourly, it's going to be hard to get any client, no matter how big the company is, to sign a contract at $400 an hour. So what I like to do is structure any contract based off of like a retainer if I'm doing long-term work, and that's one monthly sum, and I get paid once a month.
Mhm.
And that way, I will typically charge before the work is done. And then at the end of the month, I'll add up anything that ended up being out of scope or any expenses like travel or mileage or anything if I'm working with a client in person. If I'm doing a short-term engagement, like one of the high ticket programs I mentioned, that's very different. So that's going to be one lump sum for whatever the term of the engagement is. I typically will do 90 days because I find it hard to get really good results in time less than that. However, that is typically me working 5 to 10 hours a week max for that client during that time period. And I structure the programs, and I teach all of my fractional clients this. We structure our programs where it is a templated process. It
Mhm.
is the same problem you're solving for every single client. And that way you can go in and have this really efficient process. You know exactly what you're doing. You have all of the structure built, all of the materials built, and you're just executing and just creating incredible results for your client. Now, when you structure it the right way, that's where you can very easily end up making like $400 an hour. But it is like this game of making sure your operations are in place, your deliverables and your expectations are in place. So it's a little bit of a puzzle to figure out depending on what kind of service you're providing, but it's very, very much possible. And the last part of it too is like it's marketing, right? Like no matter what you're selling, like if we think of like a Louis Vuitton purse, they're so expensive. Are they actually worth materially worth that much? No, right? But it's perception and it's positioning. And so people will very willingly pay that much. And I'm not like a purse person, but like they're expensive. And I know that it doesn't cost them that much. And that's why they're a $1 billion company. So it's the same thing with a fractional business. It's all about positioning and having the right niche and having the right service and solving the right business problem.
So, who would you say would be the ideal candidate to start this type of fractional business? Is it going to be, because I would assume that you would need to have um, quite a bit of knowledge in a specific area to be able to get into something like this?
Yeah, this is my favorite question that I get almost daily. I will get people saying, well, I can't do this because I've never had a C-suite title. I did not have a C-suite title, but I am a CMO for my clients. Now, in my case, I had worked for 10 years before I started doing this. You don't have to have 10 years of experience. What I always recommend is that you have to have at least 5 years of experience in your area of expertise. So that doesn't just mean 5 years of work experience where you started in recruiting and then you went to social media and then you were in ops. That's I mean, anyone can start a business if they want to. Like I'm not going to stop you. But to be successful, that is always what I recommend. A layer on top of that is that you have to be able to go into a business and solve a clear business level problem for them. So that is not that they don't have social media and you're going to go start social channels for them. It is, what is the business level problem that you're solving? So it could be they don't have a marketing department at all, or they've grown organically and now they need a business development function, or they need to grow quickly and they don't have a recruiting function. It's not always like building something from the ground up, but it is solving a very clear problem.
Mhm.
If you cannot go into a business and confidently solve that problem for them, you're really going to struggle because, again, you are going to live and die by your results. Now, the last part of this is I always recommend that if you're going to become a fractional, you need to have some experience in a leadership role because you're going to go in and be a leader for this business. And a lot of folks, this is typically when we run into folks who have less experience. And they go into these businesses and think they're ready to be a leader. But leadership is a learned skill. It really is. Some people are naturals at it, but it is a learned skill. And what's even more of a learned skill is working directly with C suite and acting as a C suite executive. And, you know, although I did not have a C suite title before I started, I was in a C suite function.
Hmm.
So that was an advantage that I had. But I really do think that if you can just confidently go into a business, you can solve their problem, you can work with a CEO and not get intimidated. And that also means you can go into a business and have hard conversations with a CEO. You can deliver hard truths. You can say no when your client really wants you to say yes. When you can really put the business problem you're there to solve first and foremost and do the best thing for your client, even if they don't understand it. Um, if you can do those things, or if you're confident that you can learn to do those things, you
Hmm.
can be a fractional. I don't believe in gatekeeping things like this.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who have started businesses and became wildly successful and they'd never done it before. So some of it is just having some grit, but there are those little pieces and there are those factors that'll make it easier for you if that's
Yeah.
something you want to do.
I can absolutely see that, and I know I have not been in the C-suite, but I have been C-suite adjacent and had to present to folks. That's actually how I got one of my jobs. I was presenting to the county manager down in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Oh,
and I presented to her often, but I had to present to her, and the library director saw me and was like, "I'd like you to come work for me." And I'm like, "You can't just
hey.
you can't just take me," but he did, because he was paying well.
Yeah,
But
hey.
then I had to present to him and his board, and it can be nerve-wracking when you're in the room with people, because then that imposter syndrome kind of starts to creep
Yes.
in, especially if you haven't been in the C-suite. Have you found that you had in the beginning or still have some imposter syndrome, and how can people kind of curb that?
Yes, very much so. And I'll say first too, this is a challenge that affects women
Mhm.
and anyone in any sort of minority group more than your average white male, right?
Yeah.
Everyone deals with imposter syndrome, but it does disproportionately affect certain groups of people. And so you have to handle it differently depending on who you are. And that's just kind of the reality of this, business world that we live in.
Mhm.
And so I will say when I work with women, it is much more of a challenge to work through than when I work with men.
Mhm.
And if we think about it, we grow up in our professional lives in a corporate system, which is a patriarchal system, right? So it is a system that teaches you to rise, but not to reign. It teaches you to make other people money and be successful, but not so successful that you leave and stop making them money. So as a fractional, you're out for yourself. It's feast or famine. You're going to make money or you're not. So you have to go into your clients' businesses and you have to be confident, even if you have to fake it until you make it. And that's what I had to do. This past year, I guess, has been my biggest year of overcoming imposter syndrome. And for me, the only way I got through it was just like blunt force, doing it, like being scared, but doing it anyway. And that is truly the best advice I can give anyone is you just have to do it. Imposter syndrome is not the enemy,
Mhm.
it's there to keep us it's intentionally there to keep us safe, although it's just a little misguided. So it can teach you things. And so we want to learn what our imposter syndrome is there to teach us. And as a very logical and rational person, I take that and I'm like, okay, if I'm not super confident in advising my client on this, is it because I don't believe in what I'm saying or because I actually don't know what I'm saying? And so if I don't entirely know the reasons why I'm recommending something, I'm going to go stay up all night and figure it out if I have to. But
Mhm.
if it's because I don't know if they're going to believe me, which is more often the issue in imposter syndrome, especially with women, because we're just not believed in most areas of our lives. Um, that is really where you just have to go in and do it anyway and do it scared. And when you have the right clients they're going to respect that, you know. My biggest client, they're $25 million business, and CEO is probably the best person I've ever worked with professionally. And we've grown such a great relationship, and it's out of mutual respect and having been listened to. He listens to me, he takes my advice, he'll challenge me on things, but he lets me make the decisions. But I had to fire a client this year who repeatedly overrode my advice, and I couldn't get him the results that he really wanted and that I wanted for him. And that really crushed my confidence until I got to the point where I'm like, okay, this isn't me. I chose the wrong client. And so that's on me. And I let him override me so many times, and that's on me. But you can't make someone listen. So that's when I'm like, okay, this just isn't a good fit. It's not necessarily my imposter syndrome. It's just not a good business fit,
Mhm,
if
mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because when you are out there, it all falls on you. It all falls on your
Yeah.
shoulders. And so, you're going, I tell people this all the time, you are going to overextend. You are going to choose the wrong client. You are going to mess
Yes.
up in a number of different ways. And it is so abnormal for us to say that. You hear everybody talk about, you can make six figures in 60 days and this, that, and the third. And none of that is real. This is hard
No.
work and you're going to make mistakes.
It's
It's
hard work.
okay.
Yeah. With my business, I have a digital course, and part of my way of trying to make this accessible to more people is taking my very expensive coaching program and turning it into a $30 course, which may be really stupid of me, but I want as many people as possible to have the opportunity to learn this, and in this program, you just learn to build your offer. I'm going to teach you how to build like a $5,000, $10,000 offer, but I'm not saying you're going to make it. I'm not saying you're going to sell it. Like I can't. So much of this is up to you. And as a coach, as someone who has spent, last year I spent about 10 grand on coaching for myself,
Mhm,
and about 6 grand of it was a complete waste of money. And it was coaches who barely learned my name. They hired
mhm,
other people to coach for them. They would contradict each other all the time. And I say this just because, it's very important to recognize out there when people say you're going to make six figures in 60 days. That is almost always not true. And any good coach is going to have a disclaimer in their agreement or on their website, just like I do, that says it's an earnings disclaimer that says we don't promise you anything. It's market conditions, it's what you put into it.
mhm,
And so I always encourage I encourage people to be wary even with me, like it's going to be what you make of it. But fractional work in particular, I signed like $137,000 worth of contracts in my first 2 months. But did I make that much in 2 months? No. I just signed the contracts, and so then I was able to build on that all year and have a great year. But, it took me 60 days to sign those contracts. So,
mhm,
it's hard work, and there's a system to it that can make it easier. There's strategies that can make it easier, but it's nothing will ever make hard work go away,
mhm,
especially when you have clients that you're responsible for delivering results for. There are times when I go out of scope intentionally, and every now and then I don't charge for it if I see
mhm.
that it was my mistake
Right.
that got someone off track, and
Mhm.
that's ethics in my opinion. But it's hard work.
Yeah.
Even though I
It
work
really
less than
is.
I ever have, I'm working so much harder in those
Well, see,
hours
the thing is,
than I
it's
ever did.
hard work, but you're working for you. You're not working to
Yes.
make some
It's
random faceless
yours.
person a
Yes.
billionaire.
Yes, and that's why I do it, because I spent a decade giving I've always been the kind of person that puts everything I have into everything that I do. And I've always done that in every job that I've ever had, and it's backfired on me in every job. I learned eventually that that is my nature, and I don't want to change it because I think it's one of my superpowers. So the only way I'm going to be able to use that superpower and make the impact I want to make is by having control over it and deciding who gets access to it. And when I worked for anyone else, I didn't have control over it. My very last full-time job, I had a boss who told me after we went from zero to like $3 million or something in a pipeline in a quarter. And that was from my team directing that.
Yeah.
And I got into just like a personal tiff with the CEO, and he told me I didn't work well with superior men. That's an actual quote. And so I gave my notice, and then he fired me before the end of my notice was up, you know? And that was after being the only person to ever make the company any money. So it's just when you don't have control, it's not your business. When you don't get to choose who your clients are, you're at the mercy of a system, especially as a woman or anyone who's not a white man. You're at the mercy of a system that was not built for you and is not going to bend or change for you anytime soon.
Exactly. And so you have
Yeah.
to go out there and do your own thing, which is the number
Yep.
one reason why I walked away from my job and started this because I was done. I'm
Yes.
like, I did my bid. I felt like it was prison. I did my bid. I did my
Yes.
25 years. I'm out. I'm gone. I don't want
Yeah.
to do this anymore. So,
Amazing. Oh, I got
yeah,
goosebumps.
yeah.
That's amazing.
It just when you have that power, everything in your life changes. And it's not just,
Yes.
oh,
Your
I have a
entire
business
life.
now, but everything you if a friend comes to you and they start talking crazy, you're like, whoa, I don't accept this from clients. I'm not accepting it from you. Your
Yes.
mother-in-law comes to you and she's talking like the way that you
Yep.
present yourself and carry yourself just changes.
It does. It changes. It really does change every aspect of your life. And I will say it changes it for the worse before it changes it for the better most of the time. But that's the journey.
Mhm,
And as an entrepreneur, if you're only ever focused on like where you're going and you're not appreciating the journey, it's very hard to even just look up and realize, like, oh man, my whole life is different now in amazing ways.
mhm,
So there is this value of just like appreciating all of the hardships you're inevitably going to go through as a business owner, but at the same time recognizing that they're your hardships, and when you get through it, when you're on the other side of that hardship, and there will be hardships forever, when you're on the other side of it, you have still have something that's yours
mhm,
and no one can take it away from you. And especially in this time where the economy is uncertain and unemployment is growing, whether the numbers want to reflect it or not,
mhm.
and for women especially, we're making less money 2 years in a row for the first time since the 60s. It may be a hard journey and it may be scary and very frictiony and make you a little nauseous sometimes, but it gets better. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, wow, my life's really good. It's really good.
Yeah,
I feel
I love
great.
that. I love that, and I feel like if we all if we women stick together, I know people look at me like, "Jessica, do you ever interview men?" Yeah, I interview one or two, but I feel like if we all stick together, we can kinda, like, lock arms and
Yes.
get through this because you
Yeah.
understand where I'm coming from, and I understand where you're coming from, and I can tell you how I'm, getting past this, that, and the third, and you can do the same for
Yeah.
me, and if we can share our resources, the men aren't gonna listen to us anyway, so we don't have to worry about them
Thousand
taking it.
percent.
We can
It's
we can
also one of the
survive.
reasons it's one of the reasons I turned my expensive program into this really cheap course,
Mhm,
because it was easy for me to get men to take interest in my expensive program, but women are less likely to invest in themselves, especially a high dollar. And, I'm not out here trying to change the way women think. Like, I think as a woman, no one can change the way I think. So, like, I'm not here to try to change anybody, but I'm going to make it more accessible, and I'm going to open the door for you, and you can walk through it or not, but it is it is a very real thing that being an entrepreneur as a woman is a very different experience. And so, it's part of why when I do coach people, I also teach them how to choose clients and what red flags to look out for. And, just like the client I had to fire just a few months ago, I've been doing this 3 years now, and I still ended up with a client who I thought was a great guy in the beginning and just ended up being kind of a jerk. So,
Yeah.
I ignored the red flags because I wanted money and it bit me in the butt. So
And that happens. That
it
absolutely
does.
happens.
Hmm.
So, why don't you tell us more about your program?
Sure. So I have two programs. I have a virtual course that I'm so excited about. I've been working on this thing for like over a year now. It is basically the virtual version of my coaching program, which I still offer for those who want one on one support in like a 12-week program format. We work together weekly and we build your business together. You get to learn from all of my mistakes that I spent several years making, so you don't have to make them. Or if you do make them, we work through it together, so you don't have to, cry in the bathtub alone at night like I did for a really long time. But I also have a version of that in a virtual course that is very, very affordable. It's under $40 for now. And it teaches you everything from how to figure out what skills you already have that you can sell, what skills are worth 6 figures or 7 figures, what skills a business would actually pay for, and then how to package that up into this really awesome five to $10,000 offer or more, depending on who you're selling to. And then figuring out who to sell it to and how to sell it to them, and then getting out in the world so you can start your business, whether you're already a fractional and you're just not sure where to go next, or if you are in corporate and crying in the bathtub at night, then you can start on your own and start as a side hustle,
Mhm.
and it helps you can build it all in a weekend. If you really hustle, you can do it in a day, but I like people to take their time. If you're
Mhm.
building a lifelong business, there's no rush.
Right.
But yes, that's a really big thing. There's no rush, but yeah, I mean, you'll walk away, whether you go through my coaching program or the course, you'll walk away with an offer that is vetted and you can actually sell, that you can be confident that businesses actually want. Because one of the scariest parts is just going out and saying, "Hey, I have this thing. Do you want it?" and not knowing at all if anyone wants it. So this takes out a lot of time and guesswork and fear,
Yeah.
to put it
Yeah.
simply. But my goal is just, with all of this, I just want as many people, women especially, to start businesses and leave systems and lifestyles behind that don't serve them, because it's 2026. There's no reason to stay somewhere where you're not valued or wanted or respected. There's no
Oh,
point to it anymore.
now that is the quote of the day. That is the quote of
Yes.
the day. Aly, I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I think conversations like these are so important because they give all of us permission to look at our skills differently and start
Yes.
taking ourselves seriously. And I think that's really, really important. So before we wrap
Thank
up,
you.
I want to let everybody know I am going to have all of Aly's information in the show notes and the description of the video. So you will be able to reach out to her and find out more about her programs and about her. If you need a fractional CMO, you know who to call. Yeah, we're going to do that.
Yep. Give me a
And
call.
exactly, exactly. Again, Aly, thank you so much. This has
Thank
been
you.
phenomenal.
I agree. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And then we will see all of y'all back here, same place, same time next week. Thanks, y'all.